On a winter morning in 1772, a rider left Boston carrying a bundle of letters into the countryside. They were not orders. They asked only that each town read them, debate them, and write back. Within a year, those letters had built something no colony had ever possessed, a standing network that could carry one argument to every town at once and make a whole province answer in a single voice. It did not begin in a state house. It began with a burning ship and a quarrel over who paid the judges. The ship came first. In June 1772, the British customs schooner Gaspé ran aground while chasing suspected smugglers off the coast of Rhode Island. Her commander had spent months seizing cargo and stopping local vessels, and the colony despised him. That night, men from Providence rowed out in the dark, overpowered the crew, wounded the captain, and burned the ship to the waterline. In Rhode Island, it was celebrated. In London, it was a crime against the crown. The response frightened even the men who had cheered the flames. A royal commission was appointed to hunt down those responsible, and it carried the power to send the accused across the ocean to stand trial in England. For colonists, that struck at something older than any tax. An Englishman had the right to be tried by a jury of his neighbours, men who knew him and the ground he stood on. Ship him 3,000 miles to a London courtroom, and the right became a fiction. The commission never found its witnesses, and no one was convicted. But the precedent hung in the air. That same autumn, a second blow landed in Massachusetts. Governor Thomas Hutchinson announced that the colony's superior court judges would now be paid directly by the crown, not by the assembly that had always controlled their salaries. A judge who depended on the assembly answered, in part, to the people. A judge paid by the crown answered only to the crown. When Boston's town meeting demanded an explanation, Hutchinson dismissed its right to even ask. Between the Gaspé Commission and the salaries, colonists saw the same design twice, a court system slipping out of local hands. The old tools of protest answered single laws. This threat was quieter, and it was permanent. Samuel Adams had spent years building temporary networks of resistance across Massachusetts. Now he moved to make them permanent. On November 2nd, 1772, a Boston town meeting at Faneuil Hall created a standing committee of correspondence, 21 members, with Adams and Dr. Joseph Warren among them. Earlier committees had dissolved once a crisis passed. This one would not. Its task was to state the colony's rights, publish every violation of them, and carry both to every other town in Massachusetts. A single town had built a permanent political voice. The question now was whether anyone would answer it. Within 3 weeks, it produced the document that would define the movement. Samuel Adams drafted a statement of the colonists' natural rights. Joseph Warren catalogued the ways Britain had violated them. A third section invited every town to answer. Together they became known as the Boston Pamphlet. Printed and carried across Massachusetts, the packet did not command obedience. It asked towns to deliberate for themselves, and that single choice let the movement spread without breaking apart. A town that reasoned its own way to Boston's conclusion owned that conclusion and would defend it. The replies came faster than Boston's leaders had expected. The pamphlet had named grievances the towns already felt, but had never seen set down in one place, and reading them together made the danger feel shared. Marlborough answered within 2 weeks. Worcester debated through several sessions, then formed its own committee and expanded on Boston's arguments. Even farming villages of a few hundred people organized, accepting that resistance now required permanent organization. Within months, scores of towns had written back, and the answers revealed something none of them had seen alone. Their grievances were strikingly similar. Coastal towns feared for their trade. Inland towns feared for their land and their courts. The committees turned scattered local complaints into a single recognizable pattern. In town after town, meetings that had once argued over roads and fences now debated the rights of Englishmen and the limits of Parliament. The committees were no longer just relaying Boston's mail. Many of them developed regular procedures for recording votes and authenticating correspondence, so that no message could be forged or denied. Merchants, ministers, lawyers, and farmers bent over the same correspondence. A political conversation, once confined to Boston's wharves, was reaching the inland farm. But a province was not a continent, and the fear that moved Boston was moving others. The Gaspé Commission had alarmed Virginia as deeply as Massachusetts, for if the men of one colony could be dragged across the sea for trial, so could the men of any. On March 12, 1773, the Virginia House of Burgesses created its own Committee of Correspondence, and this one carried the authority of a colonial legislature, not merely a town meeting. Younger Burgesses drove it, and Dabney Carr introduced the resolutions. Speaker Peyton Randolph named Richard Henry Lee, Patrick Henry, and Thomas Jefferson to it, giving the body instant weight. Boston's local innovation now had a partner among the most powerful men in the largest colony. Virginia's committee sent circular letters to every colonial assembly, urging each to build the same. Within months, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and South Carolina answered. Colonial leaders no longer trusted isolated resistance to restrain Parliament, and for the first time the separate colonies possessed a means of speaking to one another directly, without waiting on London. Boston had built the network. Virginia had made it continental. Now it would be tested. The first challenge came sooner than anyone expected. That test was not a law, but a bundle of private letters. In London, Benjamin Franklin had come into possession of confidential letters written years earlier by Governor Hutchinson and his lieutenant governor, letters that urged their superiors in Britain to curb what they called colonial liberties. Franklin sent them home to Boston. In June 1773, Samuel Adams read them aloud to the Massachusetts Assembly, and then the committees did what they were built to do. Printed in the Boston Gazette and copied along the correspondence routes, Hutchinson's own words travelled from town to town. The man who governed Massachusetts stood exposed in his own handwriting, a ruler who had schemed against the people he ruled. The Assembly petitioned the Crown for his removal. The committees had learned that they could do more than share grievances. They could expose the men who caused them. Even as Hutchinson's reputation burned, Parliament handed the committees their next cause. In the spring of 1773, the Tea Act gave the struggling East India Company the right to sell its tea directly in the colonies. The tea would arrive cheaper than before, but it still carried the small Townshend duty the tax colonists had refused for years to pay. Patriot leaders and newspapers framed it at once, not as a bargain, but as a trap. To buy the cheap tea was to admit that Parliament could tax the colonies whenever it wished. Through the autumn, ships loaded with that tea set sail for Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Charleston. In New York and Philadelphia, committees met the ships and turned them back before the tea could land. In Charleston, the cargo was seized and locked away. Boston alone could find no such exit. The colony's tea had been consigned to Governor Hutchinson's own sons, and Hutchinson refused to let the ships leave the harbour until their cargo was landed and the duty paid. 3 ships rode at anchor with their tea aboard, and a deadline running against them, held by a governor who would not yield. The committees had spent the previous year teaching the town to see the tax for what it was. Now the town had to decide what to do about it. In little more than a year, a quarrel over judges and a burning ship had produced something new. An enduring network of committees now bound Boston to the smallest inland town, and Massachusetts to Virginia and the colonies beyond. Separate grievances had been forged into a single argument, carried by riders along routes no royal official controlled. The network was built. It had not yet been tested by a crisis of its own making. That test was already waiting in Boston Harbor, in the holds of 3 ships packed in chests of tea. In the next episode, that cargo brings the long quarrel to a breaking point on the night of December 16th, 1773. The Boston Tea Party.